And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. On today, we have John Brennan, who is the Church Mobilization Manager for Prison Fellowship and the International Director of Celebrate Recovery Inside. So, John, how are you this afternoon?
You know, if I were any better, I'd be somebody's twin. I just got to figure out who it's going to be.
Okay. Well, I enjoy your spirit, your humor. Looking forward to a conversation about the nuts and bolts of prison ministry. And I'm not sure we can quite say post-pandemic yet. Somebody may send me an email on that, but hopefully as things are lightening up, praying towards that end. A lot of people have been kind of locked out of doing ministry in prison due to COVID. We believe that prison ministry is one of the key ways that the church can partner with the state to solve problems and point people to Jesus. So one of the topics we come back to from time to time to say, hey, how can we do that well? I consider Prison Fellowship kind of a platinum standard. There are certainly a number of ministries working in this space, but a Prison Fellowship founded by Chuck Colson is certainly a great one. And so, John, if you would jump in, give us kind of a brief overview of your background and your current position so that listeners understand where you're speaking from.
Sure. Well, my name is John Brennan, and I'll introduce you.
I actually got that right.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I'm going to introduce myself the same way I would on a Celebrate Recovery night.
Awesome.
I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with chemical addiction, sex addiction, and family dysfunction, and my name is John. And one of the things that has been just an absolute transition in my life, I spent 26 years drinking and drugging, chasing women and just making a mess of my life, destroying 2 marriages, destroying relationships along the way. And, I was the epitome of a disaster looking for a place to happen. And part of that, well, a lot of that ended on October 8th of 1989 when I was in a DUI wreck. And I put an off-duty police officer and his girlfriend all busted up in the hospital. And amazingly enough, the drunk walked away without a scratch. And so I was arrested that night and taken away. And the deal was that I had to figure out at that point in time what needed to change. I had to get sober and figure out a way to do that. I hunted and tried to figure out, I'd been told 6 months earlier, not even 6 months earlier, maybe 3 months earlier, that I would be dead if I didn't stop drinking. And I left my doctor's office that afternoon and drove to a liquor store and picked up a 6-pack and went home. So I really didn't care about anything or anybody. I just figured I'd be better off dead. So I might as well continue to drink. And I figured I was well on my way. So the transition happened in 1989 with that wreck. But the other part of it that happened in December of that year, my sponsor took me to I thought we were going to another AA meeting. And he picked me up and he says, what are you doing? And I said, I'm open for anything. He says, well, come on with me. So where we headed? He goes, you'll find out. And he took me to this high school. And I thought, okay, well, I know the high school. And then he drove in there and there's this big banner that says that it was a church. And I thought, man, I'm stuck with a Bible thumper. I don't need this. This is not what I signed up for. And I went and I don't know that I participated, but I was, I understood the message, but just figured that the God thing was not for me. So fast forward a few months and there's basically this constant, just tap on my shoulder saying, you need to do something. You can't just sit here and accept all this stuff and not do anything about it. And as I was getting ready to be arrested and sent to prison, I got a phone call from my attorney and he said, John, we need a hearing. And I said, okay, what are we doing? He goes, well, this is your sentencing. And I said, okay, that's great. And so I showed up and we walked in the courtroom and I told my attorney, I said, listen, it's time for me just to come clean. I can't do this anymore. I can't hide this. This is not, it's not me anymore. I'm sobering up and trying to figure out, the next best step. So when the judge said, how do you plead? And I said, well, I said, Your Honor, I plead guilty. And his mouth about hit the floor. And my attorney looked at me like in shock. And so he said, it's time for recess. You attorneys meet me in the back. And because my attorney wanted me to plead not guilty. And I just couldn't, I was guilty. So I needed to deal with it and own it. And so they went to the back for about a half an hour and they came back out. And the judge says, so you understand exactly what's going on here? And I said, yes, sir. And he says, by pleading guilty, you're admitting that you made this mistake. Yes, sir. He said, okay. And so he wrapped the gavel and I get sentenced. So I had 30 days to get my affairs in order. And I went at the end of the 30 days and checked in. And there was about 50 of us sitting in an open yard outside an Orange County jail in Southern California. And they said, hey, you just wait over there. Okay. So I sat and I waited. I was the last guy called up. And the person doing the assignments for facilities to go to said, you got 15 weekends to do in jail. And he says, and you don't belong in jail or prison. So you're going to very simply report to this address and you're going to do 15 weekends of community service instead. But you're going to have 3 years of formal probation. Okay. So, it was like, okay, God knew what I needed to do and how I needed to do it. So we're going to fast forward now a few years. 1994, I gave up. I just said, you know what, I'm done. I don't need this anymore. And I'm going to move on and just go back out to my old lifestyle. And kind of delayed it, had my sponsor beating on my head a lot. And finally he said, what's your plan? And I told him, and he said, John, you can't give up what you've got. You've got almost 5 years. And I said, well, that's all fine and good, but I'm just tired of this. I want to go back to my old lifestyle. It was more fun. And so as I was going through that, I called Saddleback Church one night, a friend of mine who was ironically an Orange County sheriff. I called her up and I said, hey, what are you doing tonight? And she goes, hey, you know what? You've been talking about going back drinking. And there's this group that meets at my church. And I said, okay. I said, what's the name of the group? And she told me, and I said, okay, fine. And so I called the church late on a Friday night thinking 4:30 or so, I'll just go ahead and wrap this in and see what happens. And the next thing I know, I get a phone call back from that church. I thought I'd called late enough that nobody would respond. And I got a phone call back from John Baker, who is the founder of Celebrate Recovery. And he said, tell me your story. So I told him what was going on. And he said, where's your home meeting? And I told him on Raymond Way. He goes, well, he says, they have 24-hour meetings going right now between now and New Year's Day. So get down there and stay in the meetings, stay in the rooms until you lose that desire to drink. And then he said, next Friday night is a Celebrate Recovery at our church. So you're welcome to come. And that was my first introduction to what a Celebrate Recovery was. So, as things went forward, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to understand what God was trying to do and not knowing who God was. So it was really a difficult struggle for me. I've been raised in a religion that was punishing, that was critical, that was condemning, that I was never going to be good enough. And so I just chose at that point to walk this path and see what would happen. Church opened up in the area. I went in, and a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, there's this new church opening up. Did you get the flyer? And I said, yeah. You put it on my car? He goes, yeah. I said, okay. So where's the church? He goes, well, it's not too far from where you live. Okay. So I drive up to this church, and I walked in, and I saw my friend Dave, and I said, hey, Dave, what's going on? And he says, you're here. And I said, yeah. He goes, I didn't think you'd come. And I said, neither did I. But I had nothing better to do today. So went into the church, and I sit down, and the first thing I see is that same pastor from the high school. And he was up there in his Hawaiian print shirt, and his slacks, no shoes on, but no socks. And I thought, man, this is a little bit weird, but that's okay. And so I listened to this guy talk. Well, it was the same pastor. It was Rick Warren. And I was at Saddleback Church when they were still in a high school. And so here we are sitting there a few years later, and this brand new facility, all this great stuff. And I thought, okay, God, you've got my attention. Yeah. And so the next thing that happened was a guy gets up and he tells his story, told his testimony from up front. And Rick shared the story of the prodigal son. And I thought, yeah, that's my story. I destroyed everything along the way that I could, and I was reduced to nothing. And now it was time to be essentially lifted back up. And I couldn't do it. I needed someone like God to be able to lift me back up and put the right people in my place. So that's all I prayed. Help me. I can't do this by myself. I'm about to give up. Just help me. And so God continued to put people in my life. I was laughing because I was thinking about Dave. As Dave and I were standing there talking, I said, Dave, what are all those people? What are the books they're carrying? Are they going to a study somewhere or something? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, the books, the big books that they got in their hands. And he goes, John, those are Bibles. I said, well, what do they do with a Bible at church? And he goes, oh man, we got some talking to do. So yeah. It was just amazing in the process of things. And the funny thing is, this is my Bible that I went that afternoon and spoke with Dave. And I said, this is the book that's going to change my life. And he said, I'm only going to tell you one thing about that book. And I said, okay. He said, greatest love story I've ever read. Okay. So we're going to fast forward a few years, and we start participating in Celebrate Recovery. We start doing some different things with churches, and I start asking churches, would you be willing to start a Celebrate Recovery ministry? And I got a lot of no's. And then finally, I walked into a church and they said, right place, right time. And that was in Paramount, California at Emmanuel Reformed Church. And we started putting together a team to start and launch Celebrate Recovery there. So we launched there on March, good Catholic Irish Day, St. Patrick's Day of 2000. Okay. We launched Celebrate Recovery there, and it is still up and running today. And it's just an incredible ministry that has absolutely transformed my life, made me look at myself instead of blaming everyone else. And so it opened a lot of doors for me, going back and becoming an ordained pastor, and leaving the work environment and being bivocational for a while, and then leaving that environment, coming back and being a full-time pastor. And it has opened doors that I didn't think were possible. About 2 years ago, I resigned from my church as a pastor. I was the recovery pastor, and I resigned from the church. And I thought, you know what, this is now it's time for me to retire and just kind of cruise into some golf. And God had a different plan. And so he woke me up one day, and I looked online, and there was this job opening at Prison Fellowship. And a friend of mine in California said, if you don't apply for this job, we're going to have a conversation. And I said, okay. So I looked at it, and it just seemed like a really good fit. And so I applied and I got it. So now I'm the Church Mobilization Manager for the Central U.S. for Prison Fellowship. And I get to serve in 11 states here in the North Central area. And I love what I get to do. I wake up every day excited about what God's going to show me. And he always shows me something. So that's kind of the fast forward version of, this could be an hour and a half conversation,
yep. But no, it's a beautiful story. Yeah. And God just had to tap you on the shoulder in a way that only, sometimes the Holy Spirit can do. And for those of you that are listening and not watching the video, that Bible looked like it had some duct tape on the back spine and looked very well worn. So I'm blessed by that story. So then and certainly you've shared some of your experience with addiction and recovery and then coming to Christ. what led you into the space of ministering actually in prisons to individuals, what we call recovering citizens, so, or returning citizens. So
returning, yeah. One of the great things I think that happened was me knowing that I should have been in prison for a lot of years and realizing how God saved me. And I go back to that story of the prodigal son, and I think of myself as a cracked pot. And I'm this cracked, broken mess that God has seen a way to put back together and remold and reshape into something usable. And so I'm now that usable vessel that he uses to pour into, but also for me to spill out of, so that I can pour into other people's lives. And so I had a guy that I worked with when I was bivocational, and I was the operations manager for this company, and he was one of the sales reps. And he came by for 6 months. I'd been working there, and every day he was coming by going, "John, you need to go to prison with me." I knew his past. He'd spent 11 years plus in and out of prison. And I thought, this guy wants me to do something really stupid and join him in prison so he has a good cellmate. And I thought, Jeff, I just can't do this. I cannot do this. He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "We can't do anything really stupid. I'm going down a good path." He goes, No. We're just going to go serve. At the end, they let you out. I said, "Oh, well, whatever. Maybe that's not for me." So after 6 months, to get him off my back, I chose to go. And so we went down to a facility in Southern California, and we walked into that facility, and I thought, I'm not coming back. And I thought, there is no way. This is crazy. Well, then all the guys start filing in. And there's this one guy that walks in. I'm about 6'3", about 250. So I don't get intimidated very easily. Sure. And this one little guy walks in. He's maybe 5'6", 5'7". And he just had this scowl. I've never seen anybody so angry in my life. And he just had this scowl on his face. And I was absolutely ready to walk out of the room. So I was just done with it. And so at the end of the night, we get done and we leave. And then we stood out in the street and we prayed. And then I got in my car and I drove home. And I got home and I'm ranting with my wife. I cannot go back to this place. There's no way I'm going back there. This is crazy. He is outrageously nuts because he thinks he can use me in a place like this. I can't relate to these guys. What are they thinking? What's God thinking? And so my wife goes, "Whoa, time out. Just tell Jeff no." And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. So I go back to work the next morning. All night, I'm wrestling with this whole process of telling Jeff no. I'm figuring out the speech I'm going to give to him. And I walk into my office and I sit down, turn on my computer, door wrap on the door frame of my office. And he says, "Hey, John, they're doing bricks and pillows tonight. You want to go?" And I thought, well, he does youth ministry too. So I thought, yeah, that would be fun. He couldn't do prison ministry 2 nights in a row. And so, okay, yeah, that sounds great. And he's laughing out loud, walking down the hallway. And I'm thinking, oh boy, something didn't go well there. And so my boss calls me into a meeting. I get back out of that meeting. I'm hunting Jeff down because I'm going to tell him, "No, Jeff, I'm not going to go back to the prison thing. That's not for me." He was gone for the day. In my recovery, I learned one really strong thing. You commit to something, you follow through. At the end of the day, when that event is over, whatever the situation is, when that's over, then you can tell the person you're not coming back. So I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Sure. So get all settled in. We walk into this facility. There's 3 of us that walk in that night. On the way in, the warden is asking me, "Would you please share your story tonight?" I thought, sure, I'll do that. So I walk into this room, and what's the first face I see? This angry guy sitting in the front row, just copping a lean. And I mean, he was just like on fire for anger. And I thought, yeah, I'm not in the right place. So I shared my story that night. And about a third of the way through my story, he quit looking at me. And he was just looking down. And I thought, wonder what that's all about. So I get outside afterwards. The warden thanks me for sharing my story. And then she escorts us out, and then we go out and we're standing in the street and we pray. And then I walked over to the curb and I sat down and I opened my Bible and I open it up, and I don't know where I'm looking, but I open up to Isaiah 61. And I get this amazing, just this flash of understanding that I'm called to minister to the people that are in prisons, and that God has me there for a purpose. And my question to God that night was, you got me here. Now what are you going to do? So as the warden was leaving, she sees me sitting on the curb, and she pulled over. I find this out about 9 months later. We did a graduation with the guys. She pulled over and she started praying that I would continue to come back into that facility, and that I would never give up on those guys. And I thought, okay. So we'll fast forward a little bit. Richard, the individual in the front row, gives his life to Christ. And I'm thinking, he's in my class. How is he? What's going on? What is God doing? I haven't had really a direct conversation with him, but he came up to me and he says, I just got to tell you something. I said, yeah, what's that? And he goes, I gave my life to Christ. And I said, how'd you do that? And then he shared with me, and I said, that's awesome. I said, now what? And he goes, I don't know. So he sits back down, and I reached down to shake his hand, and I pulled him up out of the chair, and I just gave him a big hug, and I just whispered to him, God loves you, and so do I. And he just looked at me, and he just wept. And I thought, this is why God's got me here. And I thought that would be, what a great achievement, John. What a great thing you've done. And well, yeah. Then I find out that ain't the case. So as we're going through, when we would pick up, other people would pick up Richard and bring him to church, and he'd walk down the street just like determined, and kind of that nasty scowl on his face. Then he'd see my wife and I, and he'd smile, and he'd come over and give me a big hug. And I thought, that's why he's here. He's here because he needs to be here, and I'm here because I need to walk with him. So we started inviting him to family functions. We took him to his first picnic from the age of, I think he said 12 years old, he was dealing heroin. And so he was in and out of youth facilities, and then spent 22 years of his 41 at that time in prison. And so we took him to a Mother's Day picnic at a park, and he was sitting in a lawn chair just crying. And I said, Richard, what's going on? And he said, I've never been to a family function where there wasn't drunkenness and brawling. This is the first time I've been to a park sober. Wow. That he could remember. And so Richard began to start working with me, and we would take him down to the beach. We'd take him different places, and we weren't on a leash with him and saying, you got to walk by us. He just had freedom to go out and do the things he wanted to do, and kind of look around the areas and stuff. And it was just transformational. So Richard, I had met this other guy, and I'm going to cry on this one. I met this other guy, and he, when I met him the first time, he had 41 tattoos between the base of his neck and the top of his head. And I thought, okay, this is not somebody I'm going to be able to break through. And while he was in prison, there was no way to connect to him. But when he got out, he was in the same facility. He was in a transitional facility. And so he walked into my classroom, and he had always told me, God thing, not for me. I'm not going to hide behind the Bible. And I thought, okay. And so he walked into the room, and we sat and we talked that night for a few minutes, and then he got up and he left. And then about a week later, I came back in the room, and here he was the first guy in there. And I said, what's going on? He goes, I got to stop running. I can't do this. And I said, familiar story. Yeah. And he goes, what do you mean? And I shared with him, and he goes, wow. He says, how do I do this give my life to Christ thing? And I said, well, let's talk about that. So we sat, we talked, we walked through it. And he finally gives up. And he says, I need to give up. Okay. So now once the guys become Christians in this facility, we start bringing them to our local church. And so I walk in with Thomas. So I walk up and the front steps of the church. Now, this is how the church is supposed to be. And I walk in with Thomas. And as I'm walking up the steps, little old lady, 85 years old, Bobby is just, I know she's a saint in heaven, but I'm telling you, it's just amazing lady. And she sees me, and every time she never called me pastor. She always called me Johnny. Hi, Johnny, how you doing? And I'm thinking, Bobby, I'm doing great. And so she goes, who's your friend? Now, keep in mind, 41 tattoos, right? And just tattooed everywhere. And I said, well, this is Thomas. And she looks at him, she stands up. She's always sitting down to greet people. She stands up, she grabs him by both arms and says, Sonny, you are in the right place and you sit with me. And walks him down the center aisle of the church to the front row on the right-hand side. And she says, I sit here, you sit here. And every time I'm in church and you're in church together, we sit together. And so, I mean, it was just, and after that, it was just, I mean, God used her to really teach him what love was, because he didn't know. He had no clue. So why am I doing prison ministry? That's two pretty good reasons.
Wow.
And now I love what I get to do.
Well, and so I've heard these stories twice now. They're still as impactful. And for church leaders that are out there listening, if you're thinking about someone like that walking into your church, I was just waiting for what are you doing here? You're not going to sit next to me, kind of ostracizing him. I was, especially the first time I heard it, was kind of tensed up, like, oh no, this is not going to go. And then it's beautiful. And what a great example. And so I could listen to stories all day. I did want to get to some of the nuts and bolts. What you shared, just the beautiful redemption. And you see the gospel at work in these lives, where in some sectors of society, maybe it's a little more hidden. It's no less miraculous, but maybe we don't kind of perceive what goes on. And so it's just beautiful. But if someone is out there that is feeling burdened, okay, I see the need for this. How can my church get involved? How can I, as an individual, get involved? What I love about Prison Fellowship is there's so many different ways to get engaged. So I'd love to run through just some of the nuts and bolts as practically as we can. How can individuals, as prisons are in a sense kind of opening back up? Now it's a slow process in some places, but I am seeing that ministries are going back in with some restrictions, but it's opening back up. How can Christians get engaged? So would you talk to us a little bit about some of the key ways that Prison Fellowship serves in prisons?
Well, the first thing for anybody to do that wants to serve anywhere, it's got to start with prayer. Like before we started recording, one of the things that we did was pray. And I believe everything that we do in ministry has to be surrounded with prayer. That's number one. Number two, I think the best way is to contact the local jail first and find out who the chaplain is, and get a hold of the chaplain, take them to lunch, sit down and find out, is there any openings and how can we minister and help you do your job? And I think when they start to realize that you're coming in to do it, you're not relying on them to do the work, that the volunteers will be coming in to do the work. And so it's once people experience that, and you do like an information session, gather people in the church and say, hey, we're looking to serve in this one facility. Would you be interested in doing that? And yeah, okay, let me see what it looks like. So come on in, we'll do an information session, ask me any questions you want to, and then let's have a conversation with the local chaplain in the local jail. There can be an area chaplain in the county, and then there's statewide in the DOC and the Departments of Correction. There are chaplains there, usually in the state office. And so there's an opportunity to connect with them at a lot of different levels, but that's typically the best way to find out. Men and women that are coming into your local churches that maybe look like they might have a prison tattoo, you might want to start a conversation with them instead of walking away from them. Buy them a cup of coffee. They're usually free at church. And you can invite them to sit down and have a coffee and a donut with you and talk about, hey, tell me your story. That's the best way to find out about a guy's his personal story is to ask him. And if you ask somebody their story and, what brought you to this point, what brought you to church? Well, this friend of mine was going through this prison thing and he told me about this jail thing that he was going through. And I thought, well, this is the church where it's at, so I might as well check it out. And so they'll start to talk amongst themselves, and that information comes back then to the church. And as a church, we need to be talking to these people. We need to be welcoming them in and letting them know that this is where they belong, because you're just as broken as they are. And there's no them and they and those guys and any of that kind of stuff. It's all of us. We are one kingdom and we are one people, and we get to serve together for one purpose. And that's to serve God the best way possible and to teach people about love and hope. So if you had one thing to do, that would be it. That would be the starting place. Find out from your church if there's anything going on that you may not be aware of. There might be a jail ministry or a prison ministry that's already happening. They're off site and you don't know who these people are. So connect with them. Talk to the local pastors in the local churches as well.
I know one of the signature ministries for prison fellowship is the Academy. And my understanding is that generally is done more in state or federal penitentiaries, not in county jails. And maybe I misunderstood that, but if somebody wants to get involved with an academy, what does that look like? And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me about the academy is that it isn't just kind of a short-term Bible study, as important as that is, but it's actually a longer-term effort to bring not just spiritual renewal, but also life skills and help individuals prepare for coming back out. So a very holistic kind of long-term strategy. So would you dive into the academy and other efforts along those lines?
Sure. The academy is really something that started as a result of bringing other ministries inside a prison and then gathering them all together to find out the best of the best and then putting them into a program that allowed men and women who were within, I think it's within 2 years of getting released from prison, to be able to learn some life skills, learn some ways to deal with some of the past, and walk into the world again with a better attitude and a changed heart. And so in the process of that, there's things like Celebrate Recovery are part of the academies, Life's Healing Choices, the step study groups, a dad's program. How am I going to be a good dad if I don't know how to be a good dad and I never had a good example? We talk about mentoring. We talk about different ways to financially plan your future. How are you going to survive? What do you need first? Doing some of the assessments and looking at some of the assessments that these guys are taking prior to getting released, so that we can find out what their real needs are. Is there a need for a bus pass? Is there a need for a driver's license? Is there a need for a social security card? A lot of men and women that I come into contact with today have no documents that tell them that they're legal. And so it's just an opportunity to go through that process together. It's sharing the information in a group of about 40 people. And you're together for about almost 50 weeks. And it's a slow, I don't want to say remedial because that's not right, but it's a slow process of building blocks. And, this is what it's going to be built on, and this is what it's going to look like. And these are the challenges you're going to face. Remember when I shared this story about bricks and pillows? A brick, when a guy throws a brick at you, that's what's going to hit you when you get out. The pillow is how you're going to land. So what am I preparing for pillows when the bricks come flying? And so that's the thing to be aware of. And so the academy is kind of taking those steps along the way and helping people to be prepared for when they do get released and return to the community. It's helping them see that transformation is not something you need to tell people about. Transformation is something you need to live. And people in your own family will know that you've changed. They just won't know what until you tell them. What changed you? And so it's those kinds of things that the academies build on and allow the men and women that go through them to understand the love story, to understand how to use it. And it's not a weapon to be used to beat people over the head with. It's something to store in your heart so that when a verse comes to mind, when somebody says, how am I going to heal through all this stuff? You're going to look at James 5:16. Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Okay, that's not something that just comes to mind because of something that you read someplace somewhere. It's something you store so that you can use in the proper way and apply it in your daily life. So it's that kind of process that I think the academy helps to fulfill. They look at things like we used to call it criminal addictive thinking, and short-term cat thinking. And when rent is due, and I'm a normal person out on the street, if rent is due, I find an extra job, I find something I can sell, and I make the money for the rent for that month. Okay. Thomas and Richard were great examples of this. And they said, if that's what you do, here's what I do. If rent is due and I'm short, I'm going to be hunting different kinds of places that I can break into, or different kinds of cars that I can steal something from, so I can take it down to the pawn shop, get the money I need to be, to cover my rent. So it's just two different types of thinking, but it's no different. We're all looking for the same goal. The difference is the means to get there. So we're trying to get them to understand that the means is different. And so it's just an understanding of breaking some old rules and regulations of whether that's in gangs or out on the streets or part of the family life or whatever that is, but to get them to understand and to think it through, but think it through differently.
And this is why, listeners have been following us for some time. This is one of the distinctives I look for in ministries, that I want to ask that question: who's doing the hard work? Actually, certainly the gospel is the answer. It transforms lives, but we should also be mindful of what if I don't have a social security card or a driver's license? I mean, how do you get a bank account? How do you get a car? How do you get a house? These are practical, kind of hands and feet of Jesus type of ministries that are actually doing the hard work of coming alongside people. And also I've increasingly in this space found that 2 to 3 months, that can be helpful. But if you're looking at life transformation, it's year, 2 year, kind of walking alongside them to see actual transformation in someone's life. And certainly I just think about my own life. How long does it take to change a habit or the way that I think about something? The same is going to be true in this context. So that's why I love the idea of the academy and its long-term transformative approach.
Yeah.
One other kind of key ministry outreach from Prison Fellowship that certainly excited about is Angel Tree.
Right.
And so if a listener is not familiar with it is a very broad program. A lot of people know, but I love that. Would you explain kind of nuts and bolts of how that works?
Sure. Angel Tree is it was started about 40 years ago, and it was developed because of a woman who was in prison serving time, and she was watching everybody collecting stuff like soap and different kinds of things that they could package up and send home to their kids. And when she got released, she thought, you know what, I'm never going to watch a kid not have Christmas in a proper way. And so that's the kind of the grassroots of Angel Tree. Now we're going to fast forward 40 years later, and here's what we do. We work with churches who would like to support children whose parents are incarcerated. We don't deal in the general community kids. We deal just with children whose parents are serving time or have recently been released but have been serving time. And so what we do is we try to work with them in such a way, the churches, so that they see the benefit of serving these families. So it's not about just bringing a gift at Christmas time and then, okay, we're packing up and we'll see you next year. How are we going to do this year round? How are we going to minister to the family so that they know they have a safe place? So if I were to explain it as when a parent, I'm going to use kind of an extreme example, but when a parent gets arrested in front of a child, who's the first person that the child blames? It's not the parent. It's not guilt on the child. It's the police. That's who they're going to blame first. So that's going to wear off over a period of time because they're going to start hearing stories about how messed up dad was. And so they'll start to blame dad because dad's abandoned them. And he's now sitting away from them and they can't talk to him. And now kids are making fun of him and they're bullying him because he's not got a dad around and his dad is in prison or, whatever the situation is. And so that becomes public knowledge. And then the kids are starting to fall away from the normal structure of life. So a gift at Christmas time comes on behalf of the parent, not the church. The church is doing the hands and feet work, but the parent fills out a form in prison and says, this is for Jimmy. And Jimmy is 8 years old and he loves toy trucks. And so the church then will receive that information. Now he'll also send a message, and the message might be, hey, Jimmy, this is dad and I love you and I care about you and I didn't forget you. And this gift is for you. Merry Christmas. I love you. Mm. So that is the gift tag that goes on the gift that's presented to the child through the church. Mm. So now what we've started to do is, wait a minute, dad never followed through on any promises he ever gave me. He always promises stuff and he never followed through on anything. So sure, yeah, I'm going to get a gift, right? So he shows up at this church who's having a little bit of a party. They're inviting all these kids from whose parents are incarcerated and their caregivers. And they walk into this big room and here's Jimmy. My dad said he's going to send me a present. Did he send me one? And Josh, I'll just use you as an example. Well, just a second, let me go check. So you go back and you check the rack and here's this gift and it's for Jimmy. And you walk back and you tell him, yep, it's here. I want to see it. So you say, come on with me. You take him back there, you show him the gift. Huh. Did it really come from my dad? Well, let's look at the tag. Can you read the tag? Yeah. What does it say? He didn't forget.
Yeah.
He loves me. And he's coming home soon.
Yeah.
So that's what Jimmy gets to walk away with. That changes hearts. Now we started to build the bridge between the dad who's incarcerated and the child who's on the outside. So that bridge starts to get built, and maybe there's a conversation to happen. Maybe there's a letter that gets written from Jimmy to his dad saying, hey, Dad, I love you. Thanks for the present. And then he gets to receive that. Jimmy's dad receives that. So we're building that relationship. Now, what do we do beyond Christmas? How do we get the families back? And that's the next piece of Angel Tree. And that's the piece we get to work with now is we're working on how do we do this for the rest of the year. We do it through Angel Tree camping. We do it through sports camps. We do it through different kinds of programs that we can do for the kids. We do it through hope events in the prisons and outside the prisons. We do it through caring for the caregivers so that they know that they're loved and they're cared for and that they're important. And so we start building that dialogue. We start building relationship so that they know that they have a place where they can come and they're going to be safe and nobody's going to judge them or look down on them because their loved one is in prison. So it's building that whole process as far as the Angel Tree piece goes. So there's two pieces to Angel Tree. One is traditional, where we would do that kind of a thing, have a party or direct delivery to the home of the child. And then we have what we call virtual Angel Tree. So if a person in some parts of the United States, it's not open yet. And so we still need to be able to deliver gifts to kids. So what we do is we have it so that you can go online, you can deposit $25, you can select the child you want it to go to, and you deliver your gift. Prison Fellowship takes care of that process. So all the same components, but everything is there.
And so as listeners can see, I love the fact Prison Fellowship's going to have taken this issue, this particular place for God's called the ministry, and thought about all these different ways how to serve people. And we'll certainly link to the website, how you can get involved with Angel Tree if you or your church wants to do that. There was another key resource I was not aware of until recently. To set this up a bit, we've talked on the podcast a good bit about what would the church's public witness be? What would it be founded on? Well, it's on the Imago Dei. And I sometimes joke that, well, attorneys figure out a long time ago, if you say something in Latin, it sounds cooler. But we're all made in the image of God, right? And one of the issues that is directly linked to that is the fact that those that are in prison are still image bearers, and that justice, criminal justice, should be a justice that restores. It should be balanced, even-handed. It should be restorative. And certainly there are issues in any human criminal justice system, but in the United States, there are a lot of challenges. And I love the new Bible study, maybe not new to me at least, titled Outrageous Justice from Prison Fellowship. And it's done in a kind of a small group context. And so I'm always looking for, all right, how can I equip churches to think through this particular issue, criminal justice, how to think through it well? On one hand, saying it's got to be justice that restores. They also need to be biblical principles, and certainly this resource does that. Right. So we'll link to that study on the website, but could you give us just a kind of high-level view of what that study's about?
If you wanted to look at the justice system through the lens of the Bible, that's what outrageous justice is. So it's taking out the justice system as a whole, and I think we would all be in agreement that the justice system is broken. But when we look at it from a biblical standpoint, maybe it's broken, but there's things that we need to do. At the end, it's a 6-week study, and I just took a group of pastors from around the United States through this study. We did it over 8 weeks. The first week, we did kind of an overview. Hey, here's what we're going to do. This is what it looks like. Then the next 6 weeks is video driven. And then the last week was just a discussion about what we learned. And I'll have to say that in the process of that, I learned more leading it than anyone else on the call. We did it via Zoom, and I believe that I learned more about the justice system in the, I'll just say the inequities in the justice system than I ever understood before. And it was really good because there was such an eclectic mix of people. So it wasn't, just a group of people getting together and, 3 weeks into it, you're going, so what are we going to study next? Every week has a call to action. So it's not just about going through the study. It's saying, how are you going to do something about this? Now, every chapter isn't set up for everybody, but there is one that will fit everybody in the group. So it's really a cool way to learn and understand about the justice system. If I ran with a campaign not too long ago over in Iowa, where it was the sentence for crack cocaine, 5 grams of crack cocaine was the same sentence as 100 grams of powder cocaine. The difference is this: one is usage, one is distribution. And when I think about that from that perspective, in the usage department, the crack cocaine was such a cheaper version of cocaine that it became more available in the less affluent neighborhoods, which then led to prison sentences for people of color. When I'll call it in the privileged side of the house, as the 100 grams came across and they got a 10-year sentence, it was not that big a deal because it wasn't trafficking. And so they get reduced sentences. They have, attorneys that do a good job for them in court. They can afford all that stuff. You have one aspect of society that's being undermined in the process and being given unfair sentences. And you have another aspect of society that's getting let off pretty easily. So there was a campaign that Prison Fellowship stepped into to be part of that. And part of that comes out of this outrageous justice process. So it's really a good way to see and really think through what the videos are about. My wife had an amazing revelation in it. She said, I never thought about this one aspect when this one guy shared in the video, and he said, every single moment of every single day that I'm in prison, I'm reminded of the crime that put me here. So his label then becomes his crime. And when he leaves prison, what's he thinking? That's who I am. I'm this criminal. And I've got this tattoo across my forehead that says, this is all I'll ever be. And so now go back to the academy for a second. Now we have a way to bridge that and help them see beyond that label and that title and that condemning, self-condemning that has happened, and gives them an opportunity now to see it in a different light.
One of the reasons I appreciate this resource is that if you begin talking about ethnic unity and justice, you talk about political, and everybody right to their partisan corners in a sense. And what I've tried to do is provide two pastors. Like, if this is something we're supposed to care about, we're supposed to engage in a biblical way. I feel like it's part of my job to say, here's how. Like, here's some practical ways you can do that. And we had on a Democratic rep and a Republican rep here in Indiana that worked together on a criminal justice reform bill that passed unanimously. And so I thought that was a great example. This resource is also, now, again, people that read it, you may not agree with everything in it, but I know it's from a biblical perspective, and it'll make you really think through these issues. And so, again, just trying to equip pastors with resources. Very, very well done. The individuals involved, one is an attorney, another one was a very high-level public servant in Michigan that had personal experience in this area. So great resource. Want to get that out there. Yep. And the last thing as we wind down, I know that you also work overseas a little bit. I know that's a big part of your heart. So I don't know if just briefly you could share a story about what you're doing overseas as well.
You know, there's two great areas that we're serving in. And one of the roles that I get to serve in is the International Director for Celebrate Recovery inside prisons and jails. So I work with training men and women volunteers that are going into prisons in other countries. Last October, a year ago now, we served, I walked through with 25 volunteers from Kenya to go into 92 prisons there. Now, if you think about the size of this country and 92 prisons, there's a lot of prisons there. So they are fully equipped and knocking on doors and gaining entry into the prisons to take Celebrate Recovery inside those facilities. I think the other one that I'm really excited about is, and my wife does this with me, so it's not just me doing this. My wife works on the outside. She's a state rep for Northern Illinois on the outside. So she works with churches and helping them get started and starting up Celebrate Recovery. But she's also training 5 churches in the Cape Town area to start Celebrate Recovery. So she's doing that via Zoom and then training their leaders to be legitimate, solid, foundationally built Celebrate Recovery ministries down there. And then I'm working with 2 high schools in the, it's north of Johannesburg. That'll be a good reference point for folks. And basically what we're doing, so there's a student version of Celebrate Recovery called The Landing. And it basically takes the kids through the same situations that the adults are going through. It's just done in an age-appropriate fashion. And so we have trained 12 leaders in South Africa to do The Landing at a church. And starting in January, we'll be taking that into 2 additional high schools there that have allowed us to bring faith-based materials in 1 day a week and have a local pastor come in and teach a sermon. And then he's going to be inviting them into Celebrate Recovery for the youth down there. Last piece of what I get to do, I'm working with a new pastor down in that Johannesburg area that is going to, has 12 volunteers that are ready to be trained to go into the prison there. And so we'll continue to do what we get to do no matter where the world takes us and where God lets us serve.
Well, one of the principles that I'll often talk about on the podcast is that Christianity is an historic global faith. And sometimes we can get very focused on kind of our own context, but just, I'm sure being able to share some of those stories with individuals you're ministering to here and vice versa, I'm sure that really helps out in explaining the faith and just being able to share new experiences. So John, just want to say thank you for taking some time. Just love all the different things that Prison Fellowship is doing. Looking forward to getting this out to pastors. If you feel led to, hey, maybe God's tugging you on the heart, just as you described, kind of tapping, maybe somebody's praying for you to get involved. Here's some easy ways to jump in and do that. So John, if you had a billboard on which you could share a message to the kind of Bible preaching, gospel preaching church, what would you put on it?
For me, it's I guess the number one thing is pray, but you have to choose what you're going to pray. And I think that if it were to say, pray, ... use me. Because I believe that's the message we all hear, but maybe it's not the message we all listen to.
That's
so
good.
There you go.
It's also it takes some courage, right? Because when God answers and says, yes, I'll use you, you got to be ready to go.
Oh, and by the way, you'll be in Kenya next week.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you. That's great and an important prayer for all of us. And so, John, thanks again for taking some time to talk to us about prison ministry, how we can do that effectively in our context now.
Well, I appreciate the time, Josh. God bless you.